So the talk is on adding HTTPS to your site. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The most popular on the cloud operating system is Ubuntu Linux. If you're using a Mac or any kind of Linux, most of the commands in this guide will work, no problem, no modifications. If you're using some other distro, you probably already know. You're used to seeing tutorials for Ubuntu and you know how to do it in CentOS or Red Hat or whatever you're using. So just so you know, these commands, if they look a little bit unfamiliar, that's why it's for Ubuntu if you're not using it. And the commands, the OpenSSL package, the actual things you type in and the config and stuff are identical if you're doing the certificates and stuff on a Mac or on a Linux machine. If you're a Windows user, you're not left out. You just boot up a virtual machine and you can do the commands in that, or you can just get a cheap VPS or something. One of these places that you pay by the hour or by the minute, and do the commands there. Copy these certificates and stuff over, and you're good to go. So it doesn't much matter as long as your server is running Linux. Then this stuff will work. So like I started to say, last one of these I got into kind of technical stuff, and the eyes kind of glazed over. So I'll go more quickly through this. I do hope people will have a go, and if if it seems very complicated, it's probably because I've over-explained it. Just go ahead and try it anyways. This month, Gandhi.net has a promo for XYZ domains, the .xyz, and it's literally 75p, and it comes with email hosting and a free HTTPS certificate, all their domains do. So just get a throwaway domain to practice on, right? It costs you 75p, that's the cheapest way to do this. And then once you get that working, if you're happy with that, and you go, okay, now you can do it on your production site if you want. But nobody's even going to know you've registered this and tried it if you make a mess of it, so don't worry about it. So SSLTLS, WTF. So everybody says the terms are kind of interchangeable. The correct term is actually TLS, Transport Layer Security. That's what everybody's using. You don't actually use SSL anymore because it's totally obsolete. It's busted. If you go and you test your site with one of these third-party, HTTPS testing sites like SSL Labs or whatever, you'll just get an F instantly if you're actually using SSL. We'll get into the configs later, but like I said, I'm just going to go over the technical stuff and just do a kind of higher level. So it's an end-to-end encrypted connection, and it encapsulates the HTTP traffic. This is important. If you don't remember anything else, just remember it encapsulates this, and this is why, like if you're, let's say if you're doing a WordPress site and you have HT access, and you have rules and stuff in there, redirects. So if you use one of these, and you think you're going to try to redirect the HTTPS traffic, maybe with or without a www catch, either one of those, that's not going to work because that's HTTP rules, and that's encapsulated in this. So first thing you have to do is have the handshake. Well, this is the term for it. It's encrypted handshake. So the first thing you have to do when you're setting up the server, if you want to do a redirect properly, is you have to have your server blocks or your virtual hosts for putting to your certificates. The code examples are in there, and I'll walk you through that if that's confusing to you. But just a mental note: your HT access and how you used to do things won't automatically work. If somebody just types in the web browser www.whatever and you run your domain without it, it'll probably work because the first request comes over HTTP. But if somebody, for whatever reason, they use the S in there, it breaks everything. So. Done correctly, it's new session keys for each repeat visit, so it's forward secrecy. So if somebody, if somebody visits your site and they're doing something, if you have sensitive material or something you want to protect, every single time they connect, it's a different key. So even if their machine gets compromised later, the person attacking them can't go back and look at past traffic. This is forward secrecy. It's a good thing. And if you choose the right cipher suites, and you don't have to worry about what that means or what those are, we'll get into an automatic generator for that, and it'll just work. Automagic is what I call it, right? So about 80% of sites are not using this yet. It's total number of sites, but because the traffic to sites is not equal, a great deal of traffic is encrypted. So Facebook, Google, lots of popular sites, they're all HTTPS by default. And so a great deal of traffic is encrypted by default, and you get a SEO boost and other kind of benefits from it too. For for those that don't know, so when you connect to Wi-Fi, like on my machine here, I'm on the local Wi-Fi network. If you don't know this, Wi-Fi is just plain text. It's just wide open, no protection on the traffic. So everything my machine is sending or receiving to the internet, everything I type, every keystroke goes plain text, and every other device could read that. By default, they don't. You have to get pretty geeky, but there's no technical barrier to that. So when you connect, it's, imagine your machine says, hey, Wi-Fi router, give me, google.com or gmail.com, and my login is my username and my password. If you don't use HTTPS, that's what's happening. Anybody on your network, coffee shop or whatever, they could just grab your credentials. This happens quite a lot. So HTTPS fixes that. You can't do that. Just end-to-end encrypted from your device all the way to the server, and nobody in the middle can see the traffic. They can't even see.
Would it be the same for email? If you're sending email over
Yes.
secure?
If the email goes, if you've logged in, or there's something in your options if you really want to dig down in there. Start TLS. So any reputable email provider is going to support this, and it's opportunistic encryption. So the computer can try encryption first, and if it doesn't work, it'll go back to unencrypted. But this is not what you want. You want it to say encrypted or nothing, right? So you send this encrypted or login encrypted or fail. This is what you want. So if you're with any of the big providers, that's going to happen automatically. There are a few companies here locally who shall remain nameless who don't even have HTTPS on their email login, and this is a big problem. There's something called leverage attacks. So let's say Robbie logs in, and I'm at the coffee shop, and he logs into Facebook, and he's not following bad, security practice, and he's got the same credentials for his email address, which I know. So I've grabbed his Facebook credentials already. I can log into that. I don't care about that. I'll go to his email account. I'll try Gmail and Outlook and all the popular ones, the same credentials I've stolen, and there's pretty good odds I'll get in. Just picking on you. Hopefully you're using different passwords, but if you're not, they could do this. And once you're in somebody's email account, you're gold. You can go anywhere. When you should check the most. So the description, I guess, I made a note here. Indiana Jones. So it's like HTTPS is like if you're going to send a packet somewhere. It's like hiring Indiana Jones to take it. You're certain it's going to get there. It's going to be well protected. Doesn't matter if it's secret or not, right? He's going to take it there, and then HTTP is like just handing it to some random person saying, please take this secret note somewhere. I mean, odds are they're going to take a peek at it. Myths about it. Banks, credit cards only. This is so Jersey's data protection guidance for this is if you're collecting sensitive data, doesn't even have to be credit card info, it doesn't matter if you're a bank or not. Like I explained with the email, or if you have, probably not a contact form, because some of that info is public, but there are, you can do like loan applications or upload CVs to some of the recruitment agencies here and this kind of stuff, and they're asking for quite a lot of, it's like a how to impersonate somebody, how to do identity theft kind of credentials, and they're getting it plain text. This is a bad idea to do this. And these people should when you ask for a certain amount of personal info, there's a tipping point pretty early on that you want to start protecting that info. So if you just got a blog or something, it doesn't matter too much, but you should do it anyways. It takes very little time. Many of you are probably using Google Webmaster Tools, or you've done domain validation where you do a DNS, to prove that you own the domain name. It's not much harder than that. You can copy, paste, and use a config generator, and you can get your certificate that way with DNS. So if you've done that, you're probably smart enough to just wing it, and get your certificate that way if you want. I do it a different way by email, but that's up to you. It's personal preference. And many guides, like I said, lots of people are using this. The other myth is that it's slow, expensive, or complicated. It's dirt cheap to do it. It's just a few pounds per year to do it, or free. There's a few options. But Google did a big study when they went all HTTPS, and they measured it at big scale, right? At scale, they've done this, and it's good numbers. So less than 1% of additional CPU load and 2% extra network overhead. And that's nothing. That was a few years ago. This is before HTTP2, they used to call SPDY now. But HTTP2 now is, if you have your standard website, and I say you have a WordPress website, and it's not encrypted, If you switch over and you do self-hosting on a VPS, it's probably going to be cheaper. And if you set it up to use HTTP2, it's probably going to be faster because this technology is much newer and better. So you'll get actually a faster website by switching over to encryption. That's the best possible, scenario there. But still, just by switching to HTTP2, which requires encryption, you're going to speed things right up. You can do parallel connections. You don't have to do, file 1 and at the end of file 1, then file 2, this kind of stuff. We just do them all parallel. Yeah, so there's paid options, $4 to £11 a year. Like I said, Gandhi.net right now is doing a promo on XYZ domains. It's 75p and it comes with email and a free HTTPS cert. So, jump on that and just test it. There's also CloudFront. Cloudflare does it for free. CloudFront is probably the fastest and easiest because you don't even need to worry about renewing or anything. But that's only for static sites. So if you have a static site, if you've done it in Jekyll or something like that, you're good. I mean, I've done that in just less than 5 minutes. Just kind of wing it, go through the credential manager and go, and it just works, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You set up with an S3 bucket or something like that. But paid certs, they're very cheap. So there are some free providers who charge for revoking, which is fair, but you do want to be able to revoke stuff and rotate certificates. So free isn't automatically a good thing. Time is money, so sometimes it's good just to pay a few pounds, buy a commercial certificate, and now you're a customer and you can do these simple operations. Let's Encrypt. The last talk I did, Let's Encrypt was the new hotness. It was the new cool thing, and I'm not using it yet. I tried the private beta, and using the default one, it wants root access, and the certificate's only good for 90 days, which they have good reasons for it, but it's too much work for me. Right? So I'm lazy. I just want the easy one. So I'm going to pay £3 or £4 a year, buy a multi-year certificate, and I don't care about a cron job doing, renewing my Let's Encrypt certificates. I'm just not bothered. Sooner that will be easier. And good luck to them once they get it. I'll start using it again. So the benefits of authenticity, like I was explaining about, the connection is encrypted. So with encryption, you're guaranteed that the person on the device at the end sees exactly what you sent. Nobody in the middle can interfere with anything. They can inject ads, they can sniff traffic, they can't even see which URL. They'll see the domain, the DNS request go if somebody's really watching, but they don't even know if you went to, /contact or /about us or anything. Nothing. They don't get that info. It's because it's encapsulated in the HTTP protocol. They just see that you're connecting to a site, and that's it. That's all they know. Can't mess with it. So you guarantee they're getting things just as you sent it. There are some proxy browsers. What's the one? It's kind of popular in the third world, not so much in the West. Opera Mini, is it? When you go to Can I Use, it's the one that's always red because nothing works for Opera Mini. So you go, oh, well, whatever. But they're proxying requests. So when you request a site and you're using Opera Mini, the request goes to Opera Mini servers. They, downsize the page, downsize the photos, and tamper with the data, not maliciously, but then they send it. So that's eliminated. You can't do that with a HTTPS site because nobody in the middle can mess with it. I explained about Wi-Fi hotspots. So there's companies that just do nothing but approach Wi-Fi hotspot operators and say, we'd like to, put our ads in your customer's web traffic, and it doesn't cost you anything, and we'll give you a cut, give you a percentage of the ads. And so, like I said, if you've done a website for somebody, you might not want that. It might be difficult to go to a business owner and explain to them how HTTP ad injection works. It's probably simpler just to switch their site over to HTTPS, and they won't know. Maybe they'll see it's a padlock on their site. If they look up in the URL bar, but they're probably just not even going to notice, and then that problem's eliminated. You don't have to worry about that anymore. That's been going on for a long time. The earliest example I found was a '97 LA Times article, and Microsoft was doing this with their web TV product, and they defended the practice. They said, yes, we're doing it. I said, we like it. It's a good idea. So that's kind of old. More recently, Apple.com website had tax preparation company ads injected on it by a nationwide ISP. You can imagine Apple's not very happy about this. They got a very pretty website, and important, how it looks. And here's H&R Block ads on all their pages of the website. They had a fit, but it's not. It was not encrypted, and the company wasn't doing anything wrong by doing it. It's totally legal to do. So they've switched over to HTTPS, which eliminates it again. So the privacy, of course, if you're dealing with sensitive information like email traffic, credentials, cookies, this kind of stuff, you want to protect a lot of these things. So the encryption's great for that, but even if you don't care about it, you get that authenticity and the integrity of the data. Like I said, data protection specifically recommends you do this if you're handling sensitive data. So you don't want to attract their attention. It's cheap and easy to do it. As I mentioned, HTTP2 with a parallelized connections, it's just faster, right? It's going to be faster. It's the new hotness now where you should just start using this anyways, even if your site's pretty fast on HTTP. Using Varnish or something, Varnish is great, it's super fast. I like Varnish, but it doesn't support HTTPS. So you can continue using Varnish, but then put Nginx in front of it, maybe on another machine or on the same machine, however you like to set it up, and have Nginx handle that and use HTTP2, and it'll be even faster for static content at least. The SEO, as mentioned before, there's a slight SEO bonus if you care about that kind of stuff. And referrer data, so if you're into analytics and stuff. So when someone is logged into Google and they do a search on Google, they're coming from the encrypted search. So if you're on HTTPS www.google.com and you search for, whatever, hats in Jersey, and now you've got a hat website and you want to know what people are searching for, what the terms are, because you want to optimize your site for this, for SEO. You're not getting the referrer data if your site is HTTP, because the referrer data is not sent from an encrypted search to an unencrypted site. That data is just, that's the RFCs, it's not, that data is just not passed along. This is to protect the encrypted content. But if you're using an encrypted website, you do, assuming Google gives you they don't give you every query, the referrer data for everything. But that's one more thing. And apps are a big thing, right? So iOS 9 Plus requires TLS. So if you're doing apps, you must do this, right? So if you're doing, you got somebody doing this already. If you're doing iOS apps, you have to do this. Android, as usual, they're copying this, although they have a similar policy, less rigorous, not as well done. They should have just done the same thing and required it, but they're moving in that direction. That's good. So if you're doing Android apps too, you're eventually going to need to set this up. And the bottom line is, you're in charge of the server and the domain, so people don't really know about this middleman stuff. They don't care about your CDNs and this. They're just not bothered. They're not going to learn this stuff. It's much easier just to set it up, and you're in charge of the site. You're making these decisions. Best practice is just set it up encrypted. Your CDNs, if you're using third-party ones, most of them support HTTPS anyways. So just do the right thing for the clients. It's not hard to do. Your reputation could be on the line for these kinds of things. So the risks. So if you're on shared hosting, some of these shared hosting companies want you. Some of them still say you need a dedicated IP and other kind of dumb stuff like that. So this is like a red flag. If you go to a company, or if you're talking to somebody about this and say you need a dedicated IP for this, they're a moron, and this hasn't been true for like 5-6 years. They have no clue. If you hear this kind of stuff, that's bad source of info. Just forget about that. The new certificates now don't require this. They're very cheap, and if you're using a shared hosting company, unless you really like it or you get just dirt cheap, there's something else about it you like a lot, just leave. Just go to another company that does this for you. DreamHost now are using Let's Encrypt, but you don't have to mess with it. So if you're with DreamHost, they're the first one I've noticed. It's a tick box now. When you set up hosting on DreamHost, so you can have your static or dynamic content, PHP or whatever. If you use DreamHost, it's literally now just a tick box, and they handle this for you, which is great. Super. So yeah, the cost, setup and management, not too difficult. There's config examples here, and if you get stuck with something, there's lots and lots of guides out there. Mozilla has the best configuration generator, and I've explained how to get the versions of whatever you're running, and you input that in there, and it will spit out exactly what to put in your virtual host block or your server block, depending on what server you're using. As I mentioned about one risk, if, as I mentioned about Varnish, Varnish doesn't support HTTPS. Varnish is great, it's super, but it just doesn't. They're not ever going to, is the bottom line. But that's fine. So you can't use Varnish if you like Varnish as the endpoint. You can use it in the middle if you want, but you'll need a reverse proxy to handle that, which is not that much harder to set up. So prerequisites, as I mentioned, in Mac or Linux, OpenSSH or OpenSSL is going to be installed by default. If it's not, you just install it the normal way, or just use a virtual machine or a VPS somewhere, and it will have it installed on any modern Mac, Unix, or Linux distro. Fastest way, as I said, is email validation. You're going to have to prove you own the domain name. Just a side note, too, back to the email question. If you are, if you're hosting email, or if you're running email at your domain, there's a few email addresses you're going to want to make sure that you blacklist, that nobody can do. You should probably set them up as just forwarding for yourself. So admin, administrator, webmaster, hostmaster, and postmaster at. It's one of these geeky, RFC things where technically you should have these set up, but nobody does this. However, SureMail set up, maybe late last year, I think, they set up a new email. You could sign up for SureMail, and they didn't blacklist admin at. And I thought, well, what are the odds? Surely they've done this, no pun intended. So I went and I signed up, and I got admin at SureMail or whatever it was. And at that point, I could have bought for just a couple of pounds a valid HTTPS certificate, and man in the middle attacked every single SureMail user that was on Wi-Fi that I was. I'm a nice guy, I didn't do this, and I sent them a quiet note and said, guys, you should really not do this. This is a bad practice. They are mortified, but they blocked that. So just side note, if you're doing email, there's a list there, and I don't know if I put that in my notes or not, but do look that up, and I'll add that to the notes later perhaps. But there are certain ones, the RFCs, where you should have this. Just abuse at, too, if you're on shared hosting. If you just set up abuse at your domain and forwarding to your email address, just set up an alias or something, doesn't need to be its own account. You'll get, if some moron does some takedown notice or something, people do these maliciously just to take your site offline, you'll get notified instead of the hosting company. If you haven't done this, what's going to happen is the hosting company is just going to take your site down because they don't care, right? They're I forget the term, but basically it's like YouTube, where their default is take it down and you prove you own the content, right? But if you have this email address set up, you get notified at the same time, so you can rebut this malicious, people telling you that it's their content or some nonsense. So the process, this is in the guide, the first few steps. Generate a certificate signing request, that's a CSR, and that's what you need to do you can do it on the server, or if you have a Mac or Linux machine locally, you can do it, or on a Windows machine in a VirtualBox, a virtual machine. Then you're going to validate the ownership. You can just buy a file, put a file at a certain location, they'll tell you, or email, that's the fastest. Literally, you could do this from buying a domain and setting up and getting a working certificate. You can have this done in under 20 minutes. It's DNS. If you ever tried to set up DNS, the propagation time, that's always slow. It's 20, 30 minutes or so. That's the slowest thing is DNS. Everything else is faster than that. So if you set up a, validate the domain ownership by setting up an email alias for admin at, that's the default choice. Use that, and it's dead easy. And you'll have everything ready in the server ready to go by the time DNS propagates. So you'll have it all set up, and you'll have to wait to test it until whoever your DNS provider catches up. And I think maybe the end questions. Yeah, so maybe have questions now, or if you want to ask questions later, you have my contact info on the first slide. I do hope, last time I did this, I think 2 people did it, which was cool, but we had about 25 people there. So I'm hoping for a better ratio this time. Like I said, you could get a throwaway domain, do this, just for practice, just for laughs if you want. But have a go. Just get a cheap XYZ domain, or your own, and you can buy one at a subdomain. One thing to remember when you're doing this is to the www dot. It's a subdomain technically. So if you get a certificate and you type in in the form, if you type www.example.com and you send that off, You'll get a certificate for that plus www.example.com because it always added on automatically. So just do it for the zone apex, right? So example.com when you're inputting your host name into the certificate thing. And that's explained in the notes. If not, I'll try to update them with that. And I think that's it on it. Yeah, so do it there. I put just do it, but Nike's probably trademarked that. And that's it. That's the last slide. So
How
that
easy
is
is
the
it to screw up
presentation.
your website?
Huh?
How easy is it to screw up your website trying to do it?
Well, you're not going to screw up your website, and I've made notes in there where there's the point of no return kind of things where you don't do that the first go. You make sure everything's working. You test the server configuration, and then use a third-party test. You don't need to take my word for any of this stuff. I encourage people, go use the third-party test, test your configuration, make sure it's working, and then if you're satisfied that everything is correct, then you go ahead and you force it. It's recommended that you force it, and you do these these tipping points where there's no going back from. Do go past those points once you got stuff working. I'm not going to get super technical into it, but there's ways you can set up your server configuration. You can even have, I've done a few websites now, my personal sites, where they're hard-coded into the browser lists now. Chrome and Firefox and a few others subscribe to these lists where the first, when you open a brand new computer up and the first time you connect to this in Chrome or Firefox, and you go to one of the sites, it's preload list there. It will not even attempt an HTTP connection. It's simply not possible. It will go only encrypted, which means you better have it set up and you better be listening on that port for the encrypted traffic. So, that's noted in there. That's HSTS, I think, transport security. But again, if you're not sure about that, it's in the notes there. Leave it. Make sure you get it set up. Make sure you have it working, and then you do force it. And you can tell people, on subsequent visits, don't come back to HTTP on subsequent visits. Always use HTTPS. And this is not something that's in the browser cache. You want to be sure of that you're going to use it. You can't just clear your cache, like if you messed up some htaccess file and then reload the page, it's not going to work. So you want to make sure. Maybe I've over-explained, but you'll get it.
You touch on the difference between like the levels of certificates you can get, like ED and IB.
Yeah, so for all these, I probably should have mentioned that. So domain validated, that's the one you're going to use. And then, so the strength of all of the certificates is the same. You can use longer keys, whatever, but they're all the same. Cryptographically, they're all identical. Now, if you want to pay a lot of money and you want to do business validation, if you have a business website, if you're a bank or you do payment processing, stuff like that, you can do extended validation, and that gives you the green bar with your business name, and there's a process that takes a few weeks to a month, and they'll contact you, and you have to send off your your business info, Dun & Bradstreet kind of stuff, like if you're registering as an app developer, you've probably done these things. They validate that you're a real business and that your legal business name, these kinds of things. That's the extended validation. Those cost a lot and are not recommended. There's no point in using that for, even if you're taking sensitive info, unless you're like Amazon or something, you just don't need to do that, right? Again, cryptographically, it's identical. Domain validated certs. The crypto is the same across all.
And then, can you explain a bit? Earlier last year, I think it was, Dell had an issue with HTTP certificates that were pre-signed, or they used the same certificate on each laptop.
Yeah. So antivirus and security software does this. Dell does this. So there's nothing. There are a lot of certificate authorities, right? There are hundreds. There's Hong Kong Post Office is one people like to joke about, but they're a real certificate authority, and there's nothing stopping the Hong Kong Post Office for issuing a valid cert for my domains. If somebody in Hong Kong goes and they're using their Wi-Fi, they'll see no errors and it'll work, but whoever's man in the middle of that traffic, they're going to see the traffic. They've defeated the encryption. This is just a flaw in the system. You could do certificate pinning and key pinning, which is not recommended. That's pretty nerdy, and if you're worried about that, really high value sensitive content, you can mitigate these things. But bottom line is, Dell or any other vendor, the software author, if they've installed something on the client's machine locally, they're root, right? They're going to get anything they want. So it doesn't matter, even if they didn't man in the middle, they could still just see the traffic in the browser cache, the browser history. So Dell did a kind of naughty thing where they did this. Lots of companies do this, security software, but some do it poorly. The worst examples are, I think, Lenovo. I'm not certain it's Lenovo, but within the last 2 years, on at least 2 occasions, they've done this with security software, and they weren't checking the original connection. So let's say you went to your bank website, and someone was man in the middle and using a fake certificate, you wouldn't see an error because your security software didn't check that original connection and register that there's an error. It just transparently proxied it. This is done like in the schools and businesses. It's routinely done. So if you're working in a big corporation, they'll have certificates installed in all the browsers. This is for content filtering, and sometimes they have to keep records of all traffic for regulatory reasons and these kinds of things. So it is possible to man in the middle of these things for legitimate reasons. But all you can do as a server operator is set it up correctly and set up the guidance telling people to connect encrypted to your site, and you only use certain cipher suites, these kinds of things. But there's no getting around the fact that if somebody has something on their machine that's messing with a connection, you can't help that. That's running on their machine. There's nothing you can do about that.
You said that there's like a speed increase using HTTP2.
Yes.
If you're not, is there a speed issue if you're using HTTPS?
So if you use just HTTPS without using HTTP2, if you're using within the last year or so, or last 2 years version of Apache or Nginx, not using the latest greatest, you can use what they call SPDY, which is their version of it. It's a precursor to it, and that will give you the speed advantages. If you just use plain old HTTPS, that's what the study with Google did at scale. So you are going to see, less than 1% bump on your CPU to handle the encryption overhead and the network traffic. And there is that extra, the DNS, it's the DNS, and then there's the handshake, which is, maybe a dozen or 2 milliseconds. It's not a lot, right? Like if you're doing it.
Just purely if a client comes back and says, well, for some reason we can't change everything to HTTP2, and you were wanting us to encrypt this, but for some reason we're worried about there being a speed issue.
Yeah.
It's normal. Is that what you're saying?
It's so small it's difficult to measure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's really no reason not to.
Yeah, so if you're coming from HTTP to HTTPS, it would be such an unlikely occurrence that the client would want this, and they would know to ask about it, and they would say, but you can't use HTTP2 or SPDY or these things. I'm not aware of it if that would be an issue. Theoretically, I guess it could be, but that would be a really edge case. All modern mainstream browsers support this, right? Chrome and Firefox at least, i.e. you're on your own, I don't know, maybe. At some point they'll support it. So any other questions, or does anybody want to have a go? Yeah?
If you've got an existing site that's HTTP, do you need to 301 everything so that it doesn't get like indexed twice and you get duplicate content?
Yeah, so you could do this with your, what is the term, the canonical URL, right? So you put up in your headers, there's a way to do this. So for SEO, you have best practice, especially if you're using queries with a question mark or whatever, strings after that based on people logged in for your cookies and whatever. There's a best practice that you should be following anyways for canonical URLs, which you'll put up in the head. And so it may not match what they see in the address bar, but for search engine optimization purposes, the search bots know this is the one to go to, and that will return those results.
So just leave HTTP as it is. You don't redirect it as such.
You can. I recommend redirecting because what's the point? If you're not redirecting, why bother? You could if you want to, though. I mean, it's personal preference, but best practice is to redirect. So the cookies, right? So if you have somebody, especially if you're logged in, nobody wants if they logged in over HTTPS, why kick them back to an HTTP site? Amazon does this, which is annoying. You know, they do this all the time. So you log in, and you're logged in, and the cookies they're doing it right, under the hood, but still, it's kind of a weird thing they do. Everybody else doesn't do it that way. But yeah, so redirect. Redirect is faster than rewrite, but if you do rewrite, you catch those weird edge cases where somebody has copied a URL from HTTP and manually put the S in there, and that's going to redirect to the home page, which is annoying, but they're kind of dumb for doing that anyways. I mean, why do that? It's better just to do the 301 redirect, just for the root of the domain. Everything else goes to HTTPS super fast when your server isn't doing rewrites. The code examples in there use what you asked about, the recommended way in this document here.
Is there a kind of standard lifetime for certificates that's recommended?
You can get them. I think the max is 3 years, and that's what I buy. So they're cheap. They're down to under £4 a year. Basically, you can get a 3-year certificate from one of the recommended cheap SSL security for less than £10. And you can do reissues. So if your server gets owned or whatever, you have a security problem, you didn't lose. You're not out any money. You'll have to generate a new certificate signing request and get a new certificate issued following the exact same process you did the first time. You'll get a new email to admin at, and then you use your new certificate on a new clean server. So nothing to lose, really.
If you have a certificate for domain, can you have different certificates for subdomains, or is it incorporated by that model?
Yeah, so there's a tipping point on pricing, or like I said, they'll automatically throw the www subdomain in there, so that the root and the other are covered. You could do, is it subject alternate name sans certificates or something? This is explained on the websites, but basically you can add more domain names into the certificate for additional price, or you can use unique certificates per domain name. It's kind of personal preference. There's the pricing difference, the price difference between buying lots and lots of individuals versus one with unlimited whatever, a wild card even, is there's a tipping point where you would do one or the other. The only consideration is if you're using lots of subdomains, you're probably running a pretty big site. You're doing something fancy if you need that many subdomains. And if you're doing this, you should consider that you might not want the same certificate on all those different servers. I'm assuming if you have all these subdomains, you got all the different servers out there. So if one gets compromised, they've got your private key and they can man and middle everything across your subdomains. Just something to consider. Anything else? It's free tinfoil hats after too, for your security.
Do you think that's has there been a shift when the bigger sites started shifting to HTTP? Have you seen a shift locally that more sites are adopting it, or is there still the standard
Not so much, no. I was shocked to see, companies that have the budget and have smart people, certainly smart enough to do this, not using it for email accounts and this kind of stuff. Airtel Vodafone didn't have their the Heartbleed, you might have heard of if you follow it. So more than 1 year after Heartbleed was fixed, patch, it was it was like call the techs in the middle of the night, run screaming and patch the server immediately, and your certificates are burned, get new ones, this kind of stuff. It was like an emergency, big deal. And more than a year after that, Airtel Vodafone still hadn't patched this on the server. I was shocked. And I told them, and they said, well, we're mitigating it server side, which I don't even know what that means, It's a magic pixie dust on their server or something. Yeah, so, but there are lots of companies that are doing really well, especially we've got the finance here, the banks, so their stuff is very good. Like I mentioned, there are personal finance companies here, a bunch of them. I've set up a website, insecure.org.je, with just websites that collect personal info and they don't use HTTPS. And to get on that, it's kind of like the wall of shame, but really it's meant to be educational. But they all got fair warning. They all said, hey, you know, you're doing this, you're asking personal info, and you shouldn't be doing this. Please switch over to HTTPS. And the ones that didn't answer and haven't fixed it, I posted on the site. A lot of sites did answer. Not all of them have fixed it, but as a courtesy, while they work on it, I've left them off the site. If any of you, if I've done this in to any of your sites, let me know. I'll delete it off the site, right? The point is, make sure people know. If you're working on fixing it, super, you know, get it fixed and I'll take it, because we're not trying to embarrass you. And if you're working on fixing it, super. I'll delete it. I got one, there was Jersey Law or something, and we were out to dinner with Marcus, who does the states of Jersey, all the states websites, and I handed him my phone and let him delete that one off of there. I didn't know that was one of his, you know. Marcus Fairbrush, if you know him, nice guy. But yeah, I was mortified because I know Marcus. I would have told him. I didn't realize it was one of his sites. I sent them an email to whoever's in their who is or their contact email address, and they just ignored it, and they were asking for sensitive info. And so I posted them up there. I said, whoops, you know, oh well. Small community though, so we don't want to rock the boat too much, but we have to get the message out there. This is really wrong to be doing it, and you got to fix it. And it's not that hard to fix. Right?
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Very interesting.
So have a go, try it, and then if you want to try this in the coming days and weeks, let me know. Cool. Good.